Dear 7671, 80th edition. Currently to Amendment 1, so we'll discuss the hot topics of Amendment 1 when we get there. Mostly, obviously, that's just in 722 for electric vehicles. There's Amendment 1, there's the 18th edition, there's a corrigendum to the 18th edition, then there's Amendment 1. What you may not know is there's also been a corrigendum to Amendment 1, but they pulled that out because that would have created a bit of a shitty stink. But yeah, so we'll highlight all of the little key criterias, and we do know Amendment 2 is planned to launch later this year. So when we get to the end, if we, depending on how much time we have left, we can make some discussions on the future of what this is going to do. Or alternatively, we can just, do a meeting on that later on. That's fine. But for you guys right now focusing on the 18th edition, we've got this book in our hands. Amendment 1 is a free download but pay to print scenario, which I won't bother showing you guys yet until we get to the main area where it comes from, which is obviously 722, which is going to be much later on. So you've got a copy of this book. First thing I want you to do is turn, and I do this with all of the lessons that I do, I want you to turn to page 238 in this book right now. So this is in your book where it goes from part 6 to part 7. Okay. Now that you're in the middle of the book, I want you to hold it up and just look down the spine of the book. And you'll realize at this page, 238, there is still more stuff to the right. There's still more stuff to cover in the book than what we've covered so far. So we're not even halfway through the book. The reason I'm highlighting this for you is to let you know that everything to the right here is part 7. But everything to the right here is reference material and support information, which supports everything on the left. So the reason I'm highlighting this is as we start going through these parts and these chapters, we're going to get to this point probably at the beginning of the last session or maybe into the last session. Yeah. So we'll still cover this information to the right of this. We'll visit it at numerous occasions on the journey. But as we actually are flicking through the book, making progress through the book, we're actually only going to get to nearly halfway through the book by the time we get towards the end. Everything else to the right would have been covered. I don't want you to think as we're going on through into the second session, third session, fourth session, I don't want you to think, how are we going to get through all of this in the time we've got left? All right, because a lot of you might mentally think we've got to get through the whole book. All we need to do here is have an understanding on how the book works, how it's structured, so that we can use the book, okay? My focus isn't for you to pass an exam. That might be your focus. My focus is for you to actually understand the book and actually be able to apply the book and even work from the book, be better than the book. All right, so I just wanted to show you that just so you can always mentally be aware. I don't intend for us to go left to right through the book. I intend us to go from left to the middle, and then everything on the right we're going to pop into on numerous times on that journey. Okay, just want to just throw that out there so that you can kind of not worry about that as we crack on. Okay, now if some of you guys are choosing to put tabs in your book, I did a YouTube video covering tabs and the rules for this. It's perfectly acceptable for you to tab in your book for reference points. It's perfectly acceptable for you to highlight text in your book. What you can't do is go to a website, download loads of practice papers and stick in loads of material that's mainly aimed for you to be able to pass an exam. You need to be able to use this book moving forwards. Now, there is a notes page or two at the back, so you can pop in a little scenario such as, a record of the volt drop formula, because that's not in there. You can use a little bit of that, but, you can't obviously, because I'm saying this now in case you go to, do an exam and they say you can't use that, okay? You are allowed to do tabs. You are allowed to highlight text. Now, highlighting text can't really be reversed, so it's up to you. I've seen people who have pages that are just like some kind of rainbow color, and I ask them at the end, does that actually help you? And it confuses them. So I'd recommend if you do tabs, tab away, but then maybe halfway through or 2/3 through, think about how much you've got to understand the regulations and go back and revise how helpful those tabs really are. Because a lot of people will tab away. When it comes to their exam, the tabs actually hinder them. They get in the way because they rely on the tabs instead of their understanding on the structure of the book. All right, so start though, and then go back and review. What you don't want to do is, assume your outcome and then not prepare for it. So do what you need to do. Right. So just a couple of slides to briefly cover some of the reasons why we update regulations and how the document is structured. I've had all these windows open. My PowerPoint's gone. Okay. There it is there. So this illustration is just a clear example of how many prior editions of BS 7671 there are. I actually trained up on, I think it was this yellow one here, yes. So this was the no, what I'm saying, it was the yellow 16th edition, this one here. I forgot how old I am. So it's the yellow copy of the 16th edition that I trained up on. And that went through a variety of colors. The nice brown one, which I think is our next one. I think our next one is the murky brown. I could be wrong, but I have a feeling. Then we had the 17th edition that went through the red and the yellow and then the green, and that series got quashed to the 18th edition. One of the biggest, I don't know if you remember the public draft of the 18th edition, but one of the key things that was going to be brought into the 18th edition was the Part 8 for energy efficiency. This obviously got a lot of resistance, let's say, in the comments, because it was considered not to comply with the fundamental principles, which we will start with an introduction to very soon. That didn't mean that they've gone away, and we'll mention this very, very briefly soon when we look at 60364. So it's going to come in maybe in one of the next future amendments, which will justify another book. But that's actually why the 18th edition was going to be introduced. So we're now on 2008-2020, which is Amendment 1 of the 18th edition, which is this white thing here, which is actually just a 30-odd page download that goes into this book to rewrite 722. That's all that is. So this is where we're at. Now, each time that one of these has been updated, it's either due to improvements in methods, improvements in technology, incidents that require re-regulation or restructuring of regulation. Those are some of the key reasons to update the regulations. Another reason is our change in utilization of electrical systems. In older wine regulations, we didn't utilize electricity so much. When I say utilize, I mean we didn't actually have so much stuff that relies on electricity. If you think about the homes that were wired up in the 70s and 80s, you'd have a home, you'd have a kitchen with a cooker switch and a socket on the cooker switch and a socket on the opposite wall, a single socket, sometimes up high for a fridge. That was about it. In the living space, you'd have a socket for the TV. You go to a new build house today, there's utility sockets, there's ring final circuits in kitchens, there's circuits that are just for under the counter, and then in the living space, you've got 3 or 4 sockets behind for the TV, because the actual amount of stuff that now utilizes electricity has greatly increased, and so our use of the supply has greatly increased. Our demand has also increased. We're trying to relinquish that now, but we're about to push onto that again with electric vehicles, so that's going up and down all the time. And then we have new technologies, things like the AFDDs, etc. And all that results in some form of rewriting, restructuring these regulations. All part of the fun. Could you provide a link to download that later? Download what? The Amendment 1? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll find that at lunchtime and I'll pop that up. It's if you do a Google search for BS 767 Amendment 1, you'll find that you'll go to the IET and it's a download there, and it's downloadable, but it's like a do not print kind of watermark. You have to pay to have a printable version. But yeah, I'll put up a link for you later. Okay, in the actual regulations, a couple of things. There are regulations that are obviously numbered, so they're used around the world. These regulations come from the International Electrotechnical Committee, the IEC, and they're filtered down through Senelec in Europe and then into the UK. So any regulation that ends in .1, .2, .3 has actually come from that route. If a regulation ends in .101, 102, 103, then it actually hasn't come from the top level. It was actually originated on the middle level, on the European level. Okay, those are .101 regulations. And if it's a .201 regulation, that actually didn't come from above. We've introduced that regulation ourselves. You got it? Awesome, well done. Yep. Okay, guys, he's got the little link there in the chat there for Amendment 1. Yeah, it came from on the foundation in the actual, within the committees that write BS 7671, and those are .201 regulations. You'll find many regulations are .201, 202, 203, which are in the UK only. Things like ring final circuits. Ring finals are a UK thing. Panels that need to now be made of metal in the boards, that's still currently a UK thing. Wiring systems, premature collapse, little things like this, okay? These are often introduced to accommodate problems that are much more specific to the UK. So you'll see the N regulation number will adjust accordingly, .1, .101, and .201. So going to these three levels, we can see in this illustration here, we have the International Electrotechnical Committee, the IECs, and if you actually do some research, there are IECs in all sorts of subjects. We actually focus purely on 60364. Okay, this number 60364 on the international and the European level refers to low voltage electrical installations, which is, the requirements of BS 7671. Now, there are many other standards that also offer some level of input besides 60364, but it's 60364 that is the main route that 7671 is based. So whenever I look at the future of 7671, I go and look in the European standards in Senelec at the harmonized documents, HDs, 60364s. And there'll be many of those standards and documents that right now exist in Europe, but might not occur or exist yet in the UK. But by keeping an eye on what's going on in Europe, it allows us to keep ahead of the direction of BS 7671. Because a lot of the stuff that happens in Europe will happen here. I've already mentioned Part 8 came out. Part 8 came in our draft. We questioned it. We campaigned against it. It became an Appendix 17. It says in the Appendix 17, though, this will be a part in the future. That's because to standardize, it has to be Part 8, because there is a HD 60364-8. Everything has to align, and in Europe, there is a Part 8. Yeah? Also, Part 9 coming up. But, as it grows, we're going to have to match. Okay, for harmonization, for the single market economy, everything else. All right, so we've just seen this one. But we focus purely on 7671. The book is published, the industry goes crazy. Everyone talks about the latest regs. Testers are updated to the latest regs, tools, training courses, registrations. They monitor your competence on whether or not you have the latest regs. But this book is just a tiny part of the bigger spectrum, okay? So if you actually want to know what's going on, look beyond this book. If you've been listening to me and my friends over in the E5 podcast, we are always talking about standards, and often we end up leaving 7671 and we go into other standards, most of the time because they've been relative to us at work. Okay, so do check, and we'll see it a few times in this standard where it refers to other standards, and it'll, and we'll then talk about those standards. We'll see how relevant they are. Okay, But everyone focuses on 7601. It's like a foundation. It's the root. It's the root center of all standards, but there are many that go beyond there. Now, Senelec is a committee where you've got all these members and affiliates in Europe, and the idea is to create a standard understanding to comply with the IEC International Committee, which obviously goes around to the Middle East and in Asia. It tries to do its best over in the Americas, but the Americas have their own IEEE kind of equivalents. The idea being, if we can standardize our utilization and our design and our structure of systems, then if we manufacture something here, we can then sell that produce over there. And if they manufacture produce over there, we can then purchase over here. And it creates a single kind of market scenario, an alignment. Now, there are some differences. You may go around parts of Europe and start to see, are there eventually 220 volts instead of 240 or 230? They might start talking about different frequencies. There might be different things. You'll see differences, such as, you know, simple things like the utilization methods. The plugs will be different. They'll have different standards there. Our plugs are to BS1363. BS is a British standard, but the actual requirements of that standard, BS1363, is to comply with BS7671 as one of its standards, and BS7671 has to actually coordinate with harmonized documents 60364, which basically means comply with everyone else, which means we must have the same current and voltage or very similar, so that produce can work on all sorts of things. This is standardization. Okay. Okay, so if you actually turn in your book to page 11, you'll see the preface here, and this shows you a little example of what we've just discussed. So you've got here, it says 7671 takes account of the technical substance of agreements reached at the Senelec level in what's called harmonized documents. Okay, so if no harmonized document exists, then the level documents are taken into account for the IEC level. That's the higher level. So there's nothing in Senelec, we go to the higher level. Okay, so we've got here a list of harmonized documents or IEC numbers, and you'll notice these are all 60364, which we've already just said, low voltage electrical installations. So there's a harmonized document called HD 60364-4-43. And this, from 2010, is titled Protection Against Overcurrent. And what BS7671 does is it takes those requirements, it considers how those fulfill the requirements of the UK, it might take something out of it, it might add something to it, and it adds that to a chapter of BS7671. And that chapter, to match alignment of regulation numbers, is chapter 43. So every regulation in there will end in 43, 431, 432, 433, so that when we look at European standards and international standards and UK standards, the regulations have a similar trait. Okay, and so you can see here how all of these, this -4, that's part 4. -5, that's part 5 as we know it. And then the last numbers are the chapter or the section, as you can see over here. So there's symmetry between these standards. And that's great because in the UK, we have part 7. You see here down here, 701, 702, 703, 704, 5, 6. And you'll notice it goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. It misses 7. Yeah, it misses 13. That doesn't mean that they don't exist. It means they're just not used or accepted or adopted in the UK at the moment. And so what we do is we look at what those other ones are. Yeah, we've got here 16, 20 is missing, 16 is missing, 13 is missing. Those are all about electrical systems in furniture. Those are about power over Ethernet, or DC power over data comms, which are all going to start coming in fairly soon. There's one later in the 20s, which is about supplies in halls. Okay, and there's one about conductive locations. All of those right now haven't been included within BS 7671, but they do exist. And so we keep a close eye on them to see where they're going to go. And one day they'll appear in 7671, as did with the 18th edition, the onshore units of electrical shore connections for inland navigation vessels, which basically was, you know, for vessels that are inland. So before that, mariners was pretty much compliant, but then that was updated in Europe to include things like galvanic separation. And because little requirements like that weren't within the requirements of mariners, it was at that point that the guys with the JPEL 64 committee said, okay, this now has additional requirements that mariners doesn't achieve. We now have to introduce that as well, because it has an alternative method. It has a different approach. And so because it's different to what we already have to incorporate that new requirement as well. So that's how BS 7671 evolves. It's going to constantly grow because the standards really keep adding and adding and adding. They keep evolving. So we've done some work within the E5 group to look into where this is going in the future, and there's always things to learn. We spend a lot of our time kind of researching them. I was asked just the other day about, somebody commented on a testing inspection webinar, and they said, do they even do this in Germany or France, the inspection and testing? So I immediately went, well, there will be something, because there's a HD for 60364-6, which is part 6. So I went, oh, I'll have a look. So I found the DIN document, the DIN or the VDE standard in Germany, and there is a 6 for verification. And they have the codes in that, the C1, C2, C3. It's used slightly differently, but they still have the requirement to comply with 60364. So it's all there. They just use it slightly differently in the end result. Now in Germany, however, to purchase that single bit of information would have cost quite a bit of money. Probably the same amount as this book alone. Okay, but in Europe, you actually have to pay for each individual section or chapter, depending on the quantity of the information. So you actually have to build this up over a period of investments, and it can take, you know, cost thousands and thousands of euros to actually collect this equivalent amount of information. So you actually get good value with this, which is why I kind of don't mind it. Okay, so a quick example again, just to summarize here. We have 60364-1. That's the HD or IEC level low voltage electrical installations. They've called it fundamental principles, assessment of general characteristics, and definitions. That's all in -1. We've got that in BS 7671 as parts 1, 2, and 3. This is actually about to be rewritten in 60364, and so we are doing the research right now to look at how it's being rewritten, and it's being rewritten to incorporate consideration of design. And this is what they're doing. They're looking at rewriting the fundamental principle to consider design, and with the design considerations being reworded, energy efficiency, which was kind of excluded by the committee members during the public draft commentary, kind of works its way back in. So instead of going, oh, okay, we must ensure safety of persons, livestock, and property, plus now energy efficiency, it's going to say ensure safety of persons, livestock, and property, and further design considerations. That gentle, subtle wording immediately means, right, we've now got energy efficiency in the book. So it's being rewritten to incorporate energy efficiency in one of the next future amendments. Again, we with the E5 group and myself will keep you fully updated with that as best we can. All right, but let's just focus on the book that we have at hand for as much as we can here. So 60364-44142. This is 41, electric shock, 41, chapter 41. 42, chapter 42. It's just symmetry with regulation numbers to align. Here's an example. This is a screenshot of HD 60364-5-51, okay, which might just seem gibberish to you, but that's actually, okay, that's low voltage electrical installations, 60364, 5, which is actually selection and erection of equipment as we know it in the regulations, and 51 is actually chapter 51 of the regs, common rules. So this number is the reference number for what we have in our regs as 51. It's just, again, symmetry. But this is how it would appear if you were to go into Europe or another country to reference it. And it's important that we do this kind of research, because what we've found by doing this is trends in Europe that are not yet in BS 7671, which gives us an understanding on the future of the regs again. And another standard, not 7671, but another standard you'll hear often at work will be this one, 61008. Yeah, 61008 and 61009. For you guys who do testing, you'll know those to be the BS numbers for RCDs or RCBOs. Now, we looked at 61008 and the latest version, BSEN 61008. BSEN 6108, which is a British standard European norm. This is the one in our books that's quoted, actually says in a couple of countries in Europe, they've approached this slightly differently. In Germany, RCCBs of type AC are not permitted. In Ireland, okay, there's considering on the functionality dependency. In Switzerland, type AC is not permitted. So we've noticed that these standards are saying in their normative information that other countries are starting to be very aggressive in the opposition or rejection of ACRCDs. Now, let's not forget that we'll talk about RCDs later on today. There has been a rewrite of RCDs in the regulations, but it still says in this book in front of you that ACRCDs are suitable for general applications. Yeah? But the 6188 standard in parts of Europe that are a few years ahead of us are actually saying ACRCDs are not suitable. Okay, now we've got to question why that is. So we've got to look at the root cause of this. And again, if you go to look at the webinars or the podcasts or even some of the videos that we've done, where we've explained the issue with the increase in, again, we've mentioned utilization. Yeah, we mentioned this right at the beginning. As we're using equipment more, a lot of that equipment now being energy efficiency is relying on AC to DC conversion. And that conversion is creating losses, and some of those losses will result in current leakage, and that current leakage will have some DC nature, which might put ACRCDs out of use. It's happening already in Europe. It's happening in the UK and other standards like BS 7909, which excluded them since 2011. So we've got to understand this trend. We've got to understand where the regulations is going at the same time as where it's at right now. Okay. So you hear these standards and you go, oh, well, that's just numbers. That's just more information. But if we look at them, it will give us much better understanding on the trajectory of BS 7671. So how does BS 7671 work, however? Let's try to simplify this book. Let's keep it simple. So, hang on, this got cold. Ugh. Move over there. Now, obviously, it applies to the design, the actual erection or construction, and the verification of electrical installations. But the way it's structured really is to it's biased to a designer, because it's structured in a way that kind of supports a designer's process of work. Now, you might say to yourself, "Oh, I'm not a designer." But if you take on a job such as rewiring someone's home, or if you're asked to do a job, and the decision on protective devices, equipment, reference, wiring systems, cable types, if those are your decisions, you are a designer. You might not call yourself a designer, you might not do the design full time, but design is part of your work if you make those decisions. And that, therefore, is very relevant to you. So the book is structured to allow a designer to make suitable decisions. The first thing the book does, part one, Scope, object, and fundamental principles. What does scope mean? Scope means, okay, relevance. So if I'm going to go and do a job, and that job involves rewiring some kind of oil refinery out in the middle of the North Sea, okay, I'm going to go to this book. I'm going, all right, BS 761. The first he's going to say to me in scope is it does not apply to offshore. That's because it hasn't got the technical requirements to comply with the increased levels of risk or the very, very niche areas of that type of work. So there are more detailed defined standards to comply to. They will, though, refer to this in numbers of places, but this standard alone won't accept compliance of scope. So the first thing I've got to ask myself is if this book is all I need to do my work. If I'm doing a shop, a pub, a house, this might be more than enough. There might be some standards that go outside of this. This is why I have to make sure I know what I'm doing. So that's the first thing this book will tell you. Scope, object, and fundamental principles. Is it relevant to your need? If it is, it's then going to say in the object what its objective is. It's going to ensure the safety of persons, livestock, and property from the potential, from suitable use of the electrical system. And the fundamental principles breaks those down. Electric shock, thermal overcurrent, voltage disturbances, okay, design requirements. That's part one, okay? If it's relevant, if it is, what it's going to do. Part two is definitions. That's just reference information to now use the book you've just determined from part one that you need to use. It's part 3 to 7 that really is the journey of your design. And part 3 is actually going to say to you, okay, assessment of general characteristics. What information do you need to have at the prior stage, the very early design stage? If you're about to do a rewire, you're going to ask some questions from your client. Single phase, 3-phase. TT system, TNS system, what's your earthing like? How good is your earthing? Yeah. Who's the user at the end? Are you going to rewire a school so you have young children, young learners around? Are you going to rewire an industry, a workshop, a factory with moving machinery and plant? These will change your decision making, your decisions with regards to wiring systems or protective requirements. Yeah? So you've got to ask a lot of questions right at the beginning. Do you need to consider future maintainability? Are there persons on site full time to maintain the system that you've designed and installed, or will you have to consider contractors doing that? Are there issues with compatibility? Have you divided the system up enough to make sure there's no nuisance tripping? Okay, all of that's in part 3. Pre-work survey stuff you take on board at the very beginning. You then step forward into part 4. Part 4 goes back to the fundamental principles from part 1 and tells us, okay, we have to have protection for safety. That's electric shock, thermal effect, overcurrent, and voltage disturbances. And we've got to identify methods to achieve compliance with each of those relative to the key criteria we discovered in part 3. So in other words, making sure the protection is suitable for schools or workshops or kitchens or whatever. Okay. Some situations might be suitable with some protective measures over others. Once we've decided what protective measures to take into place, we have to then, part 5, select and erect stuff. So we have common rules, chapter 51, which tells us that equipment must be in compliance with a certain standard and that labeling, identification and notices must be adequate. 52 takes us into the selection requirements of wiring systems themselves. We'll look at cable sizing, okay? Not the earth sizing, no, just the sizing of the live conductors. We'll look at the reference methods for different wiring systems. We'll look at the things like buzz bar, power track systems as well. We'll talk about the risk of premature collapse with the erection of a wiring system there as well. 53 is selection of devices for switching, control, monitoring, and protection, making sure that they are adequate, that they can be operated safely by the end user, that they're not going to discriminate or have issues with selectivity. Okay. 54 is your earthing and bonding requirements. 55 is other, and 56 is the essential safety services. All of that is in part 5. So once we've done that and we've erected it, part 6, verify it, test it. Okay. And with each of those stages, though, 3, 4, 5, or 6, it could be that due to the nature of the location, there's something from part 7 that needs to be considered. So part 7 could be bathrooms, swimming pools, saunas, it could be construction sites, it could be caravan park, but it might be that that has a requirement that is additional to these parts. So we need additional protection. So for example, caravans will have an additional requirement for earthing and bonding to bond onto the metal framework underneath the caravan. So that's additional requirements, whilst bathrooms might have restrictive requirements. Bathrooms might say in zone 1, you're only allowed to use ADS, but your voltage must be restricted to SELV. Okay, so it might restrict your protection or restrict your voltage. So it won't add to it, it will take away and narrow the acceptable levels. And that's what part 7 does. Okay, so this is all working in a flow of a design. All right, so keep now and then come back to this and think about that, because we can easily get deep into random information, and sometimes we need to just sit back and remind ourselves what chapter we're in, from what parts, and what purpose. If we can understand the chapter and the part and the purpose of regulation, then when it comes to using the regulations, it's an absolute piece of cake. And it'll be, you know, an absolute piece of cake in your exam, because instead of reading a question and going, oh, it's got the word motor, I must look for motor in the index. Okay, I'm going to say the word index very few times, by the way. You don't look at that, you go, oh, hang on, it's talking about selection, or it's talking about protections. That's part 4 or part 5. And if it's a motor, that is not selection of cables or wiring systems, that's equipment. So others is 55, and in 55 I'll then find rotating machinery. Okay, but if it's a question about protection, I'm in part 4. So you've got to try to simplify your requirement of using the regs. Keep it simple, and it becomes much easier to use. Yeah, it's a tough language, so try to make it as easy as you can.